You're listening to Biz-Souls, the business podcast with an edge, hosted by me, Rona Lewis, and Jeffrey Hansler. Tune in for perspectives and discoveries about the changing world of business. It's time to connect to the heart, soul, and humor of how business gets done.
Here we go. Hiya, Jeffrey.
Am I in senior? Yeah, hi, Rona. How you doing?
I'm great. Ready for another interesting and in-depth podcast.
Absolutely, and we're experimenting as always. This time we're working with only 2 cameras instead of 3.
Yeah, we'll give it a shot. And we should probably tell people who we are.
Oh, yeah. Hi.
Hi.
I'm Jeffrey.
This is Jeffrey Hansler. I'm Rona Lewis, and welcome to Biz-Souls. We get to the heart and soul of business and the people who make it happen.
Well, I'm in a mood today.
Yes.
All day. Well, that's good. Okay. What are we talking about today, Rona?
Storytelling.
Oh, I love storytelling.
Yeah,
I know.
There's so much more that goes into it, and you guys are gonna get the facts and interesting stories behind the facts, because storytelling is a playful way of getting facts, figures, and opinions. I always tell people, tell me a story as opposed to tell me about yourself, and I think it's just a great way to get information.
Yeah, and as I bang the mic and make noise, sorry about that, everybody. I forgot to start the timer here.
That's okay. Well, so I'll go on. So our main action point today is that storytelling is, in fact, the best way to get points across, like I just said, and for changing behaviors. It could be anywhere, and this is a business podcast, so for us, it's employees and organizations, and we will be stretching that a little bit in our examples to the world around us, because storytelling is pervasive,
Absolutely. And why do you think it works? We're going to get into the neuroscience of it. Just, top of the head, why do you think it works?
Well, for me, I get bored easily. If someone just comes up and starts listing facts and numbers and showing me pie charts, I am immediately hearing Charlie Brown's teacher. Wah, 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 wah.
You do that very well.
I'm like, thank you. It's the nasal.
Hey, wait, does the new generation know about Charlie Brown? Other than
they should. If you haven't seen
Charlie Brown specials.
Yeah. It's a great pumpkin, Charlie Brown. The Great Pumpkin.
Yeah.
I hope Charles Schultz needs to be remembered.
Well, he's been taken out of some schools.
Oh, well, that's not the only thing. We will get to that
anyway.
in a minute. Anyway.
Yeah, and so the thing is when you say that, I realize stories work, and by the same token, why don't I always use them? Why do I sometimes just start with facts? And I was thinking about this as we were doing this podcast, and I think our brains lie to us. I think it wants to think that we're smarter than we are, and so we remember the facts. Except what we forget to do is, if we translate just the facts, is the stories that were told to us the facts get, or how we turn those facts into stories into our head. Mm-hmm. So storytelling definitely is the way to go, and I think when we truncate it and don't use stories, it's because our brain just isn't really, taking a shortcut, maybe. And
we actually saw this in real life. Was it last week we did the ATD?
Right.
Yeah, that's Advanced Training and Development for.
It's Association
for
Development.
Oh,
I wish it was advanced.
I'd
like to think of what we do as advanced.
See, I just told that was a fable, and this is why I get this wrong.
That was just a screw up.
Screw up. Jeffrey has been doing webinars with them for years, and I just started doing it a little over a year ago. I still don't know what they're called. I'm so sorry. They're going to be listening and just.
She's not a member.
Guess she's not a member
of ours. She's just helping out on
I'm just assisting. Anyway,
the story.
We digress. So the story within the story is that, as we were giving the webinar, Jeffrey, you were concentrating a little bit more on the facts, and I was just
go figure
rallying in there with and here's a story that goes with that. And as people were replying to us and
After
joining
it
in.
was over,
Yeah.
some people had some questions and comments, and they wanted a compliment. Did they send them to me?
No.
Their member, their past president, their
Me.
No, they didn't
Me.
send them to me.
It was about me once
They
again.
sent them to Rona. And it's because I want to think she's much more likable. She's also,
Yes.
she was telling stories, whereas I was just focused on the facts on it. And her stories connected with people, in which they do. So let's get into some of the discoveries of neuroscience
Okie dokie.
and why we're hardwired for stories.
All right.
And why they make an emotional connection.
Well, they do make an emotional connection. You know, when I
Can I throw in facts?
I was just gonna go ahead.
Yeah, let me just
go
look,
ahead.
It's
I was gonna do it, but I got lost.
It's estimated that 65% of all human interactions
Storytelling.
revolve around storytelling.
And you know what? It's so pervasive in our society and how we communicate. We don't even realize it.
No, I know it's something that we've become unconscious about because we do it so often.
Right.
Like language, and one of our future podcasts is going to be on words and the power
Words
of words.
are important.
They are important.
Yes.
And anyway, second fact: people can recall 22 facts 22 times more effectively when those facts are in a story than if they're just listed, logically. Or
Right,
something.
because they're more relatable, and especially if they, agree with them. And you had a story about the realization of the importance of stories. Didn't you?
So like as I say, when I got into
Try saying that 5 times fast.
Yeah,
Jeffrey.
exactly. I can think.
A sentence.
So look. I've been as we grow up, we tell stories all the time. We just don't think about them, and I didn't think about them in business. And obviously, leadership went through this because I remember at a time when people kept telling, doing presentations on storytelling and how valuable it was and how leaders need to learn stories. And it just went in one ear and out another until I was invited into Tony Moiso's group, Portola Valley Riding Club. It was a bunch of cowboys that got together.
So Tony Moisos is a cowboy?
His family owns most of Santa Margarita.
Okay.
Rancho Santa Margarita, Santa Margarita. Anyway, their family's been around.
I know
for a
the wine.
Spanish
Santa
line.
Margarita. Isn't that a wine?
Anyway, I hear all these guys from different walks of life, and then they had a storytelling section there. And in that storytelling, you could just see this entire crowd of guys. They just moved in, they got closer, they got quiet. It reminded me of kids sitting around in school just listening to a story, and they were mesmerized by it. And one of the things they started doing was telling about the stories that other people had told. And then they started telling the stories, and the whole day they'd been talking about what happened last year's event or the year before. So all of a sudden it connected with me how critical stories were to communities, to people, to business leaders. I'm sorry I went off on that.
No, you're not, because you really like it. And my first thought was a bunch of cowboys sitting around like in blazing saddles and the fart scene. Shows you where mine
See,
mine
and that's
goes.
what stories do. They trigger thoughts like that, although I didn't want to trigger the fart scene.
But it's a classic. Come on, folks. If you haven't seen it, Blazing Saddles. Mel Brooks is one of the greatest storytellers. And you know what? And storytelling is important. It's been important throughout history. Many years ago, in a land far, far, away, called I don't know what they called it then, but during the Middle Ages,
Africa,
they had that most people couldn't read. So they had, ancient Africa had, they were called griots. We had minstrels and troubadours and bards in the Middle Ages and trouvères in France. There was, they had another name for everything in all these different languages, and they went around telling stories, telling news. That's how all these get passed down. Look at Appalachia. Yeah. They tell stories for to keep their history going. So that's how they did it. And we don't know what's real and what isn't. King Arthur.
And Appalachia, I immediately think of Deliverance and Burt Reynolds and
And
Squealing Pig.
that's a really
Anyway.
interesting story. Okay.
Anyway, and Native
Yes.
Americans here in the United States, before we lose the thought, I mean, the group that came across the Bering Strait and settled, they think genetically every tribe in North and South America is connected genetically to that group. Well, they were all through storytellings and legends. That's how they passed on the important parts of the tribe. That's how they collected the group. So,
And that even goes into, and I'm going to just make a real quick point because we can talk about this point all day and how storytelling is in religion, no matter what religion you're from.
Oh, yeah.
Parables and fables and all
oh,
kinds
they've
of
got
stuff.
stories up, and
Yeah.
and they've been trying to piece together what's real and what's not. Like you
Right.
mentioned King Arthur,
Right.
they still can't prove whether King Arthur was a real person, individual. They think that there's some character he's based on, but who
You don't
knows
know.
how much is true
And
or
there's
fact.
wasn't there like a famous Viking? There's a show on the History Channel, and I'm blanking on
Eric the Red.
Yes, and that wasn't who I was thinking of. It was, but there was
Some
somebody who was
Viking name
some
that we
Viking
couldn't pronounce.
that we think is a combination of a few ancient leaders that went to England and tried to take over land, and they let them stay, and all. So that was a whole thing. So we just don't know, and it's at least a way of moving history forward.
Well, and just to show how important stories are, there was a movie, a John Ford movie, the Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, and there's a
that's a great
line in it that stood out with me, and it says, "When the legend becomes fact, print the legend." And what that's just telling is the power of stories, and that brings us to what's going on now. Cancel cultures. There are a lot of negative aspects of cancel culture, and I think the positive aspects of it are they realize how important stories are, and they want to get away from these legends and get into the story so that credit can be given where credit is
Well,
due.
and we get in trouble. The editorial not in terms of being able to pick and choose for an agenda, and this is something near and dear to my heart as a person of the Jewish faith, because I'm not that religious, and I am.
You're not going to catch her at an Orthodox synagogue. Let's put it this
because
way.
I don't believe we should be separated. That's a whole different thing. But the Mouse story, and that's Maus. I read this book years ago, and I'm blanking on who wrote it. And there's a school board in Tennessee who removed it because it's supposedly inappropriate content for children. Mouse is a story of the Holocaust. It's basically a graphic novel.
It's a children's novel
about the Holocaust.
Yeah.
And the Mouse is the German. spelling, is it?
The mice are the Jews,
Yes,
and the cats.
The cats are the Germans.
Are well, let's not say German. Let's say Nazis.
Nazis. Okay, fair
Nazis.
enough.
Not all German people were Nazis.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. So
Well,
yes.
that's a whole nother thing.
Yeah, and even now, school systems are changing history books so that they don't have to teach about the Holocaust. 31 states do not require schools to tell the story about the Holocaust, and I just think that's a horrible thing. It's what, it's like how much do we really talk about the Japanese in internment camps here?
Well, and it's not a positive history that we want to do.
And it's
fear
important.
drives things.
Yeah, and it's important for both stories to be told forever.
And that's we'll end the thing on cancel culture here. That's where you're trying to cancel history that happened. You can't learn. It's the old thing. If you fail to learn from history, or however the quote goes, those who fail to learn from history are going to make the same mistakes.
Repeat it, right?
Yeah.
And speaking of quotes, we have a bunch of quotes that about storytelling that we want to share, don't we?
Yeah, we do. Just to show you that it's not how widespread it is and all the different perspectives you can take in stories. And
Yeah.
we're just really scratching the surface here. So Jonathan Gottschall, who is the author of The Storytelling Animal, he said, human life is so bound up in stories that we are thoroughly desensitized to their weird and witchy power. That's like us kids in telling the stories. And it was only after so many years that I realized the power of stories at a cowboy event and how it applied to business.
And then going to the opposite end of the of the spectrum, chairman and CEO of the Worldwide Wrestling Entertainment, Vince McMahon, said a season of pro wrestling is a series of storylines culminating with the annual WrestleMania extravaganza. It's all backstory.
It's all backstory, and you realize it's important. And what's funny is that's one of the things that I observed and didn't know how to classify. When I was younger, my grandfather on my dad's side came over from Switzerland. He didn't speak much English.
Jeffrey, you're telling a story. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yes. He didn't speak much English, and he used to love watching two things on show: wrestling, professional wrestling, and he loved roller derby. And what was hilarious...
Both heavy-duty, serious sports. Go ahead.
He loved watching those things. Even though he didn't understand them, he could tell the story by the way they were acting and what they're doing and the expressions on things. So he knew there was backstory going on, and he was fascinated with it.
Well, and that's just another quick point. Storytelling is not always just verbally. People that tell stories with their mimes. There's all different ways of telling stories. All right, back to the quotes.
Psychologist Melanie Green and Timothy Brock, they did a bunch of research, and they found that, and this is very important for business people, the more absorbed readers are in a story, which is why you should really craft them and put them together, the more the story changes them. And so that's when we get into culture. That's one of the things we listen to when we go on for a cultural organization. We listen to the stories they're telling. And Ed Schein talks about that all the time. He said, you find those espoused values from the informants and the stories they tell.
That's what makes a compelling storyteller. It's if you can at least get people to listen, and even better, help change their minds and at least see all angles. That's incredibly important.
So let's hear some. What are some other benefits of stories and quotes from people?
Barry Schwartz, who is the author of The Paradox of Choice.
One of your people?
One of my people. Why more is less. I bet he wants Mouse to stay in the school.
He probably does.
He does. There's a point where all of this choice starts to be not only unproductive, but counterproductive, a source of pain, regret, worry, and about missed opportunities and unrealistically high expectations. Basically, what he's saying is, if you just throw a bunch of things out, it gets cluttered, and you're not going to get to the gist of it. And stories remove the clutter, and they provide a path to the answer. They organize things and get rid of the minute details that might confuse people.
Yeah, and George Lakoff said, look, when you control attention, which you do with a story, and he wrote it in the book, Don't Think of an Elephant, when you control their attention...
Now I'm thinking of an elephant. Great, thanks.
You control their conclusions. And his statement is, ultimately, the story that gets the most attention is repeated the most often wins the day, which is sad about what media is doing with the stories they're telling.
Right.
It's just terrible because they're telling these stories that win the day that are absolutely destructive to the fabric of what everybody's trying to do to move ahead.
Well, yes, and and it's also how they tell them. So that's it's we'll get to that. There's actually a really cool thing that a study that happened in Brazil, and they found that with hospitalized children, the ones that were told stories had higher levels of oxytocin, which is a feel-good hormone, and lower levels of cortisol, which is the stress hormone, than a control group. Stories, they say music calms the savage breast. Stories I remember when I was a kid, my mom had a bunch of Winnie the Pooh books.
Wait, let's go back.
What?
Music calms the tragic.
It's actually not
No,
Beast.
music-
It's Savage Breast, not Savage
Breast?
Beast. That's the quote. It's not
Really?
Beast. Yes. Look it up.
Really? Wow. So they're talking about.
Don't go.
Hell has no fury.
That's right. So anyway, so my mom used to read to me all the time from books she had as a child. I actually still have them. I don't think they're first editions, but I think they're a book of 4 Winnie the Pooh, A. Milne. And she used to read them to me, and I would fall asleep to them because, it's the sound of the voice when you tell stories like this, and even when you make character, it's fun. It makes you feel safe. It's psychological safety, no matter where you are. And I fell asleep. And that's what happened with these kids. And when you have less cortisol, the body can heal better.
Well, and Winnie the Pooh was great because Winnie was Mr. Positive.
He was. And then there's Eeyore.
Eeyore. So kids learned about making choices to be positive or negative.
They could learn to think positively.
Right, and every once in a while, Eeyore, if I remember correctly, he helped out. Like when they had to pull on his tail once.
No, they would. They used to pull on his tail.
No,
That's
his tail saved him.
Pin the tail. Yes.
His tail saved him.
Yes.
Pin
the tail on the donkey, or as we say in New York, donkey.
Yeah. So Daniel Weinstecker talks about your stories creating a small hero that overcomes things. That gets through the day. Yeah, Harry Potter. Yeah, that's exactly what Harry Potter is about. And look at what that did for J.K. Rowling. Wow.
You go, girl.
Yeah, exactly. So, and there's also some evidence that that storytelling helps drug addicts or addicts of any kind. It gives them a sense of, it helps reduce their anxiety, and they tell therapy stories about helping each other, and that's basically the premise for AAA, Alcoholics Anonymous.
So, well,
which
that's
is the way
close.
people have been driving. I think AAA and AA are probably pretty the same.
There's a bunch of A's in there anyway. All due respect for both AAA and Alcoholics Anonymous, and yes, they were. It's called narrative therapy.
Yeah.
And basically, they would tell stories that mirrored the issue that these drug users were going through, and it helped them realize that they weren't the only ones. A lot of times, people who go through health issues and mental issues need to know that they are not the only ones that are going through this.
Well, and stories help with all kinds of things. And military leaders tell stories, or they make enemies. Mm-hmm. Okay, we are one, we are a group, we're together, and the enemy. Sports coaches use them all the time.
That's right.
We need to beat these guys, and they build their stories for it. And I'm sure Brady had some good stories in the huddle to tell people.
No doubt. And yes, to your point, it's stories help us realize who's with us, who's against us, what's safe and what's dangerous, if it's good or bad, if it's important or not important. It's depending on how you frame a story, because you can spin
Right.
it very easily. It teaches us lessons like that.
Yeah. And by the way, Mr. Brady, my mom loved you. You were a favorite of all else besides New England Patriots. And, if you want to join us on podcast anytime, just call us up. We'll be happy to squeeze you in.
But we're not talking politics.
Exactly. So let's get on to, the kind of form storytelling takes.
Oh,
what are some of the
tons
different forms?
well, everything from analogies, similes, metaphors.
And those are all pretty much the same, right?
Okay.
We're using comparisons
Yes.
to help clarify ideas, and they're slightly different on them. Simile might be something like I heard this in The Outlaw Josie Wales. Move your hand slow, pull your gun out slow like molasses in winter. That'd be like a simile. that'd be like a simile on it. Have you got a favorite metaphor, simile, or analogy?
Well, I have a metaphor for boring people because I'm very picky about who I hang out with. If you don't have a quick wit, so I always say that they're just about as exciting as a doorknob.
Yeah.
You know, it's like watching paint dry. Ooh.
Oh, there's another one.
Yeah.
Very good, good. And working on organizational development projects is like herding cats. I mean, trying to get everybody on the same page at the right time. It really is. It's not an easy thing to do.
Not at all. And, you know, and along with all these different forms, all of them accomplish similar things. They help us organize. They help us remember things. They keep us related to things and people, and they help us understand. They help us to change. They help us to learn. You know, so that's why, you know, we were saying it's like 65% of the times we are telling stories, because they are just so helpful.
Well, if you include metaphors, similes, and analogies, which are generally pretty short.
Yeah.
And that's why stories don't have to be long, short. You can even use fables. You know, one of the things I use to explain myself is I've been working on my emotional intelligence, which still needs work. You know, one thing.
Really?
I'm impulsive.
Yeah.
And so I tell about the frog and the Scorpio story because it explains very clearly.
It's a scorpion.
Scorpio?
We won't go into astrology right now. Sorry. He was malapropping. That's all right.
Sorry, I couldn't keep track of my own story there. So the scorpion, you know, the frog says, look, I'm not going to carry across the room because you'll sting me. And if you sting me, and the scorpion says, I won't sting you. If I sting you, we'll both drown. And the Scorpio can't help it. The scorpion cannot help himself and stings him. Right. And they both drown. They both die. And that's what impulsive does. You do it even though you know you shouldn't be doing it. And yeah. Sometimes you can't help yourself.
And on social media, Instagram has now Insta stories. You have, you know, X amount of time. And, you know, I started doing these little motivational moments on social media. And my nephew, Brian Lewis, shout out to Brian, Belu's Foods. He's got like 9 million followers on TikTok. So he's like, you got to be on TikTok and you have to tell the story in a minute or less. Crap. That's not me. If you know me, I like long drawn out stories, and I am learning to tell a story in less than a minute, in like 30, 40 seconds. And he's like, don't take a breath, don't do this, don't add this, and it's all extra. And it's awesome because you whittle down to the most important parts. And also people don't have the attention span. You know, everybody has the attention span of a gnat. So that's why TikTok is good. And
your moments of motivation, what are they called?
Moments of motivation
by Rona Lewis. Where are they posted?
Well,
I'm doing a commercial real quick.
No, I don't call them that anymore. Well, I'm on Rona Lewis. I think it's Rona Lewis 11 on TikTok. But you can, I have them on the Facebook everywhere. Just look me up.
We're tracking the stats on that. So sponsors, if you're listening,
that's right.
Watch her.
Watch
her stats go up because we've now mentioned it. Watch her stats go up. You too could be part of this.
Anyway, so but they are. I mean, that generation is important. He's 25, 26. Sorry. Anyway, and then my niece Sarah gives me the same thing. It's you know, she's in that time frame. She's an artist, does it for different reasons to sell her business, Slate and Brush Studios, and commercial. So there's different reasons. You know, selling businesses need storytelling also.
Yeah. And, you know, a little about the structures. We'll get into best practices of improving storytelling. Yeah. And we're actually getting into that. So Doug Lippman, he's got a book, Improve Your Storytelling. He took something that's been around for a while and applied it to storytelling. He says, look, there's the storytelling triangle. There's the story, there's the audience, and then there's the storyteller. And all three of those have to be considered for constructing good stories. So that's what your niece is telling you with her expectations. As the audience, they have different expectations than other audiences. It's like watching an old movie. You know, people that the old movies were structured differently. We don't have time for those anymore.
So is that a metaphor?
Oh, that could be a metaphor, yeah.
An analogy.
An analogy.
An analogy.
And then
See, we're learning too. So.
Yes, it's a constant learning. And John Truby, The Anatomy of a Story, he says stories have to have a premise, character, and movement. And he talked about movement. He goes into the styles of stories. Like there's a linear story, a meandering story, a spiral story.
I'm really good at
story.
Meandering stories.
Really? Tell me about it.
Well, it all started back when Okay, sorry.
So, best practice for improving storytelling. Well, first of all, the most organic way is just tell your friends stories.
Could you say that again a little slower so I can understand?
Was I learning my words?
A little bit.
The most organic way of improving your storytelling is just tell stories to your friends. We've lost Rona. Okay. She told me a story about her brother. Her brother used to say, "Watch, I can make Rona laugh by putting him."
Yeah, he would just stick his finger. My brother Mark is the funniest person I know, and I laugh at everything he does. And he can just put his one finger in the air, and I laugh. And it's not, if somebody else does it, because it doesn't work as well with you. It's him, because I always expect him to do something funny. And he's so, he comes up when I was writing my cookbooks. My 2 cookbooks called "Does This Cookbook Make Me Look Fat?" He edited it, and he added some great stories and funny things. So he's very very funny. So
and the only way I can make you laugh is just run.
Leave. I'm sorry.
Just take a sentence and turn it into garbage.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Anyways, it's to tell stories.
And for me, I one of the things that I do when I go in to help teams with their engagement and to feel more closer to each other, I'll either do 1-sentence storytelling or 1-word storytelling, and it's super fun. And you can do this with your kids, you can do this with your parents, depending on how old you are listening to this. Someone just starts with an outrageous sentence, and the next person it's 1 sentence, and you really have to listen. So it's great for active listening, not coming in with expectations, and you can do 1-word storytelling, and then you don't know where it ends up.
And they get better as they start telling stories.
Oh my gosh,
they start slow.
And
right?
it opens up your creativity and your innovative thinking, because a lot of times, we get in a comfort zone, and storytelling can blow that out of the water.
Right.
So.
Well, and that's great.
Yeah.
Are you crying?
Yes,
from
I
laughing?
am. Yes, I am.
I made you cry by laughing?
You just make me cry, Jeffrey. You just make me cry.
Look,
anyway.
I have clients, and for some clients I do same.
Do you make them cry too?
I make them cry too. I love doing the same program over and over, because the material's down, you've got it so locked in, and you've got the tempo of everything. Mm-hmm. And what you get to do then is change the stories so they match the audience. And to me, that's where it comes in. And you can always tell when your story matches. And so you're pulling from these stories you've been building and developing. And that's the other thing. You also develop stories when you're doing repetition.
Right.
So again, it's a great way to learn is anytime you're doing something repetition, try different stories out depending on the audience. See which ones work, which ones don't.
Yeah, and it's like comedians who go out and tell stories and see what they beta test their acts to see what connects with the audience.
Yeah. And then when I did my little bit of stand-up, and I didn't do it to be a professional comedian. I did it.
He's doing really well today.
I did it to improve my improv skills.
Right.
When I'm doing programs and stuff like that, you can tell it's worked well.
And
anyway,
yes, I am teasing Jeffrey, and he happens to be one of the best facilitators for organizational therapy.
There you go, Freudian slip.
Well, it was a Freudian slip, yeah, for organizations and things like that that I know, which is the only reason why I can tease him, because he's better than I am. So I admit. And you are. Yeah.
To me, when I really am focused on working on it better, I write them down. Right. So when I was doing comedy, and that was the point, you had to write it down. And that's one of the best pieces of advice. Is you tell a story, you try it, and then you write it down. And then somebody said, try it again and again and again. And they said if a story fails or a joke fails, rework it and play with it. Don't throw material away. That's why Seinfeld.
I would say Jerry Seinfeld. He's had books forever.
Well, and he had a big trunk that
Right.
he sold to somebody, I think, that was all his ideas
Right.
that he didn't use.
Right.
Because he wanted to start from scratch, which is, wow, amazing.
Yeah.
So I don't know how this worked for him. Anyway, we got some other points, some other ways to improve your stories.
Do you want to talk about Annette Simmons?
Yeah, I love Annette. She's great.
She's very fond of you as well.
She's got a new book out too, and the book is targeted to women. So I haven't looked it up yet, so I'll let you read it
thank you
and
for
tell
that.
me about it. Anyway,
Because he would mansplain it to me. That's why. But I'm pumped. That was a
yeah,
joke.
exactly.
Okay, sorry. Go ahead.
She said there are 6 stories everybody has to learn that's a leader or manager, and
Okay.
they're who I am, why am I here. You have to have vision stories, teaching stories, values and action stories, and I know what you're thinking stories. Great book, and what it does is says these are 6 categories of stories you should actually have a story in or work on. So it's something that you can do. It's not do a million stories. It's just 6 types of stories that you should be good at.
Yeah, and that last one, I know what you're thinking. You've actually, when you helped me with some sales stuff, you've even said use that because it kind of precludes an objection.
Yeah, it's one of the ways of getting letting people know you're in sync with them
Yeah.
and you understand them and what's going on.
Right. And I'm going to add to those 6 with some facts about story structure that will help no matter where you are. So you always want to make sure that the beginning of your story is about the audience and what you know is going to capture their attention. So basically, know your audience, and then if nothing else, know the main parts of your story. And you should usually not have more than 3 because you'll lose people. And any more than that is just way too,
Comedy trips.
yeah, or triples.
Trips.
I know,
Triples.
triples.
Oh, triples.
Yeah.
Oh,
You
got
have to
it. Got it.
explain. A good story structure makes it easy to put together an effective story. So once you have your story structure down, it's easy to tell it. If you're rambling, I don't know what that's like, Jeffrey, to tell a rambling story. I do this all the time. Instead of telling a cohesive story, define your theme. Keep that theme in the back of your mind so that your story is based on that theme. And of course, don't forget the takeaway. Especially when you're in sales, go for the ask, go for what's the point, and what distinguishes business storytelling from classical storytelling is a clearly stated takeaway, a clearly stated point. There should be no doubt in the listener's mind about what they should do in response to what you're saying.
Well, because then you're taking a risk, and they've listened to it, they've heard it, and if you don't explain it, somebody who may have been able to follow you and just not able to put the pieces together, and they may miss it. So, takeaways, it's a great thing.
Yeah, it's like Warren Buffett always said, if you can't explain a stock to a 5-year-old, don't buy it. It's the same thing. It's whatever your story you're telling, it should be easy to understand and follow.
Excellent. So should I start with final points?
Oh, yes,
bring
you
this
should.
To a close?
Sure, go ahead.
So we've covered, why it's hardwired in us. We've covered some of the
Opinions, points.
opinions
Quotes.
and points and the forms of storytelling, and then we've also covered how you can get better at it. So look, and again, my points are primarily about getting better at it because that's what we're about. So listen for stories everywhere. Watch, read and watch fiction. Understand there are stories there. When you're daydreaming, you're making a story. How did you structure that story? You should also understand your vulnerability to stories. Stories are extremely powerful, and if you're emotionally absorbed in a character, you can get lost into it. And that's how people get conned, is they get caught into a story of what's going on. Who's that guy in Hinge? The Hinge dude who was going on dates. He caught them all in the story. Tinder. Oh, okay. Recognize
One
your
of
inner
those dating things. Yeah.
Recognize your inner storytelling is locked in overdrive. So when you get that'll lead to conspiracy theories. Maybe you might start going down a dark path that way. So you gotta. Sometimes our internal storyteller goes a little bonkers, And then also the third. So the first one is listen for stories everywhere. Second one, understand when you're vulnerable to stories, and then recognize opportunities when stories will assist you and others. So when people are upset or they're emotionally hurting, that's a time for a story. That's how to connect with them. If somebody's hurt, if they've had a failure, if something's gone wrong, and then finally, as always, in everything we talk about, it's always you've got to work to get better.
Yeah.
And you've got to take this. It's got to be important. You're going to have to squirrel time away to work on your storytelling.
Right. Absolutely. And be aware, that you do tell stories more than you realize, and my final points, and I took these from my friend Kathy Klatz-Guest, who is one of my play peeps. There's a group of like 15 of us who are play experts in various areas. Not only is she a former, I don't know if she was a VP, but she had a very important position in the tech world in Silicon Valley, and then she became I don't know, she may have done it at the same time. I don't know, Kath. I'm sorry, I don't know your exact story, but she specializes in speaking skills and adding humor to your stories. She's also an awesome professional comedian, and she's got all kinds of letters after her name. So she's a big smarty pants, and she's riotously funny. And three main things she says with stories: be transparent, which goes back to your vulnerability that you were talking about, and it's being authentic. It gets the audience to trust you. Get personal. People buy people. People don't buy companies. You don't want to tell the story of a company. That's not emotional. You want to and you want to emotionalize your endings. You don't want to end with data. As she says, data makes for crummy stories. You want to give people an emotional reason to buy your product, take an action, whatever it is. So it's all about emotions and bringing those people in, whether it's with heartfelt or with humor. Or heartfelt humor.
Yep, absolutely. And the big game going on later on today, and so.
Even if you're listening to this 9 months from now, just know that we did this on Super Bowl Sunday in 2022.
Not that I'm a Super Bowl fan. Probably a little distracted because I'm watching the time because we set a clock. We were going to be done with this before Super Bowl.
And we are.
Well, it looks like we are.
So
and there'll be a lot of backstories today. So just be aware of them.
You've been listening to the Biz-Souls podcast with your hosts, Rona Lewis and Jeffrey Hansler. Did you have fun? Subscribe, rate, and leave a review. It's very much appreciated. Talk to you next week.